Welcome to the Mortgage Research Network podcast. I'm your host, Paul Centopani, and joining me today is Hannah Jones of Realtor.com fame. Hannah, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
You actually have the esteemed honor of being my inaugural guest. So we're making a little bit of history here.
Okay, amazing. I'm glad I have the full setup.
Yeah. So you're Realtor.com senior economist. How long have you been working there?
I've been at Realtor.com for almost 5 years, so like 4.5 years. So yeah, started as an analyst and have just been learning and growing through what has been a very interesting housing market from 2021, yeah, now all the way to 2026.
Yeah, that's a heck of a time to come into this industry.
Yeah.
And I've always wondered, what does being an economist entail? I'm picturing lots of line graphs and mentions of buying low and selling high.
Absolutely, lots of that. A lot of what we do is, looking at what's going on at the national market and the national level and all the things that influence the housing market, but then also taking it all the way down to the local level and giving people the information that they're really looking for about, what's happening in your zip code, in your neighborhood, in your metro, and really trying to arm people with information as they enter the housing market because it can be really scary and challenging if you don't, live and breathe housing market stuff like we do. And so I think just kind of trying to bring a lot of that information to consumers in a really digestible way is a lot of what we try to do.
And you're right, it could be a very daunting place to try to navigate. You're making one of the biggest financial decisions of your life, potentially multiple times. Having that knowledge is definitely helpful. And you guys consistently put out such great data. And a recent report that caught my eye covered the housing supply gap, which has been an issue for a while now. But it showed that gap growing to over 4 million homes in 2025, up from 3.8 million in 2024. I want to get to the base of that issue. What's kept housing construction from meeting demand?
So it's been a variety of things. So, we see on the construction side, there's increasing labor costs, increasing material costs, these things that are making it harder and more expensive to build. And then at the same time, buyer demand is relatively low. That isn't to say that, there's not a lot of pent up buyer demand, but mortgage rates are still relatively high, which means that buyers are staying on the sidelines. And so builders are a little bit, antsy, a little bit squeamish to risk overbuilding. And so because of that, we do see that builders kind of ratchet down their construction as they feel these cost pressures and know they can't really pass those costs on to buyers, and buyer demand is relatively low.
Are there specific cities or regions that have harder times with that than others?
Absolutely. We do see that there's pretty strong new construction over the last 5 years plus in, the South and the West, where there's a lot more space. It's cheaper to build, all of that. Whereas in the Northeast, it's much harder. Zoning is relatively restrictive, and there's a lot of demand, and it's really hard to keep up with that demand baseline. But then also in terms of new construction, there's not a ton of space to build. It's really expensive to build, and it's really challenging, both in terms of just sheer physical land and the zoning restrictions also.
I'm originally from the Northeast, so I can verify there's not a lot of unused space out there.
Absolutely not. It is the oldest part of the country, so it does make sense. We've been there for a while.
Makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. And housing, it's such a multi-layered, multifaceted topic, and every market has nuance, of course. Now, having said that, is there a singular measure, in your opinion, that can be taken that would help close the gap the most?
I mean, it really is new construction. We have tried lots of different ways to make housing more affordable, but really going heavily into that supply side, finding a way to build more homes where demand is highest. And so a lot of that is by kind of revising some of the zoning laws and restrictions and making it easier to build more inventory, but also to build more inventory at a price point that the typical earner in an area can afford, because that's also a big issue, right? Is okay, we can build more homes, but what if they're not at the price points that actually, address who needs homes or who's looking to buy a home?
Right, that's just like a top line number. Is there a bigger difference maybe at like the starter home price? Is there a bigger gap there than at maybe the luxury house?
Yeah, when we look at like the share of homes that are, in different price buckets, even just looking before the pandemic versus now, you see that less than $350,000 bucket, which used to be relatively large, close to half or more than half of inventory, is now down to a third or less than a third. And so you do see, and of course, wages have grown since the onset of the pandemic, but home prices have definitely outpaced that growth. And you see as that section of the market that is affordable gets smaller, that means that competition is higher, it's harder to secure those homes, and then the prices go up. And so it's really challenging for buyers who are looking in that section of the market. They may see more competition, they may see more bidding wars, all of those sorts of things, because people want affordable homes.
Yeah, of course. No one wants to be house poor.
Yeah, absolutely not.
Uh,
We would not recommend
no.
it.
Yeah, it's a vicious cycle. At the starter home price is part of, and I know obviously the construction has been not keeping up with demand. Has one reason for that been that there's not enough profit to be made at that starter home level?
Mean, possibly. It could be that, we have seen that new construction has started to shift more. During the pandemic, we saw that so much new home sales, so much new construction was at those higher price points, and we have seen some shifts back towards more affordable price points. But definitely, when you see that all of your input costs are getting higher, then the best way to kind of get your return is going to be higher priced homes, investing in higher priced homes or building higher priced homes.
So your report goes on to talk about affordability and the structural barriers that hold back 1.8 million potential Gen Z and millennial households. And that was just last year. Can we talk about those barriers and what they mean? It's got to be more than just avocado toast, right?
It's definitely more than avocado toast. Of course, that is the ongoing thought, but considering the typical down payment today is about 30 grand, that's going to be a lot of avocado toast to avoid eating, and you're probably not going to get there still. Wages haven't kept up with home prices, as we know, and then also as down payments grow and using down payments to compete to buy a home grow and all of that, it just also makes it a lot harder to save for a down payment to even get your foot in the door. So it becomes harder. But we do see, based on survey data, that younger households are willing to be really flexible. They're willing to take on side hustles, live with their parents, live with more roommates, do all of these things to try and up their savings so they can eventually afford to buy a home. But, as housing costs are so high right now, it is definitely a huge challenge. And a lot of people are not in the rental market or in the for sale market. They're just not in the market altogether. And those, nearly 2 million missing young households.
To save 30 grand, that's a tall task. I know I don't have 30 grand in my bank account, that's for sure.
Especially for young household salaries, it's like, yeah, just save 70% of your income. It's like, oh, well, that actually might be possible if I still live with my parents or
Mhm.
live with a family member, or I can find a different way to cut expenses, or if I can get a loan from family or a gift from family.
Yeah, skipping meals, just try not eating anymore. That could always be that's an answer.
Yeah.
So in doing research for this, I found some Census Bureau data, and it showed 2025 ended with over 15 million vacant housing units. And, of course, not every vacant property is in the same places where the demand is exceeding supply, but there's got to be some overlap. So I'm just kind of wondering what holds these vacant properties back from helping meet buyer demand?
So a lot of these vacant properties of like the 15 million, we have a large portion that are either seasonally used or sometimes, resided in. They're not year-round vacant. And even of the ones that are technically year-round vacant, they may still see some seasonal use. So we're thinking like second homes, vacation homes, that sort of thing. And so those aren't really on the table. And then there's also a large portion that are in the process of being sold. So they're either for sale or for rent. So not currently being lived in, but they are on the market. And then there's another portion that are, they have been bought or they have been rented, but they have not been moved into yet. And so once we kind of take out all of those pieces, we're seeing a much smaller portion of the pie. And of those, yeah, we have the location issue of where are they located? Are they located where people want to live or where there are job centers? And then also, are they inhabitable? And so because of that, you see that big 15 million number. And then when you kind of take all these bites out of it, it comes down quite a bit. And then it's a little bit more of are these usable homes? Are these homes that we could use, especially as when we're looking at homes that can be occupied, vacancy rates are still pretty historically low.
So there are a couple of legislative things on the table right now. The Housing in the 21st Century Act just passed Senate vote. How will this help the housing market if it becomes law? And how long until the benefits of it can be seen?
Yeah, so this is, full credit where it's due. This is great, kind of trying to attack this supply side and figure out a way to make building more accessible, more doable, more affordable, fewer barriers, all of this. Um, this is a great step in the right direction. But, even if signed today, you have to wait for all of this to trickle through all of the local housing markets, construction, all of that. So you still are looking a few years down the road before it can be hugely impactful. But it's a great step in the right direction of really addressing that only looking at the demand side can sometimes backfire. And by really looking at the supply side and saying, we can find ways to make demand build, but if we don't have the supply, then that only exacerbates all of the issues that we're already having. So you also have to match it with supply side, policy, and that's what this is.
And in that same vein, two executive orders were just signed last week. The first removes regulatory barriers for construction, and the other expands access to mortgage credit. Now, for that first one, easing regulations, is this just a matter of cutting red tape, or is it brushing aside environmental protections that are kind of good to have?
Yeah, I think that there's of course, if we're doing sweeping reform, there's of course the risk of, getting into a situation where you're building in areas where it's not safe or good to build. But I think that evidence suggests that a lot of these regulatory hurdles have really added quite a bit to the cost of new construction. And so paring back some of these things that are not necessarily the most impactful or more of a hindrance than they are a benefit is a good way to again try and bring down the cost and the timeline when it comes to new construction and really drive towards the goal of more supply.
And that second executive order, it references a lot of acronyms and prior rulings, TRID, Dodd-Frank, QM. For the layman, what do those things mean?
A lot of these were put into place after the global financial crisis to have more protections for lenders and for borrowers to prevent getting into that sort of situation again. So, Dodd-Frank mandates that lenders prove that a borrower can actually pay back their loan. ATR is the ability to repay. So, a very specific set of criteria to make sure that the borrower will be able to repay. So it's a lot of these sorts of policies that are really protection to make sure that borrowers are creditworthy and that the loans are solid to keep the housing market propped up. Of course, we do not want to see a collapse again. And I think that by peeling back some of these layers, the idea or the goal, as stated in the executive order, is to kind of bring some of that lending back to community banks, because it seems that a lot of that has gone away from community banks as some of the regulatory hurdles have gotten higher. So the idea is to make the market bigger and thereby make it cheaper. More players means cheaper costs, right? But the idea is to kind of bring down some of those hurdles.
That housing collapse in 2008, loosened underwriting was a primary driver of that. Could this lead to a similar outcome? Could it hurt more borrowers than it helps?
In short, it's unlikely to. The crash was, of course, caused by these subprime loans, but this executive order does specifically target community banks, which will, keep loans on their books. And so they do have some skin in the game, not to go lending to people who are not credit worthy. And so that's the big idea, is to try and uphold this credit worthiness aspect, but loosen some of the strict rules around it. But, of course, it could be a slippery slope. It could be, getting into dangerous territory, but we are nowhere near that situation today. And so, it's not a massive concern yet, but it would be something that we would want to keep an eye on to make sure we're not getting a situation where borrowers who are not quite ready for a loan or cannot pay their loan are not growing into a large portion of the housing market.
Right, good. That quells some of my worries. Um, so if you're, a regular person in the housing market and you want to see increased residential construction in your area, what actions can you take?
You can go to your local board meetings, find out where are the zoning decisions being made, and where can I be to make my voice heard that I do want more construction in my community, which is a thing that people always say. I would love more homes to be built in my community, but really, that is how we increase housing affordability, is to increase home supply. And so advocating for that, talking to your local lawmakers or your local policy drivers about, I want to make housing more affordable in my community. I think one great way to do it would be making it possible to build more on smaller lots or just build more in general or free up this space to be built on. It's really tuning into those sort of decisions because a lot of this, we're talking about a lot of actions that are being taken at the federal level, but most of this is not really handled federally. Federal government can, incentivize or punish local governments for going one way or the other, but most of this does come down to the local level. And so if you're excited about it and you want housing to be more affordable in your community, then it's something you can get involved with.
Yeah, think global, act local. I've heard that
Yeah,
before.
absolutely. That's on a shirt or a tote bag or
Yeah,
something.
definitely a shirt. Um, so one thing that I like to ask all my guests, what's the most interesting thing or captivating your attention most in the housing market right now?
Yeah, I mean, I'll think even just today we were talking about mortgage rates have come down. I mean, now mortgage rates have gone back up. But in the beginning of the year, mortgage rates came down pretty substantially. And, we haven't really seen that kind of carried through in terms of existing home sales, pending home sales, new home sales. We haven't really seen that usual reaction that we typically do, which would be, mortgage rates come down, they break the 6% threshold, you would expect to see a little uptick in activity, and we haven't seen a whole lot of that. So I think it'll be very interesting to see, is it what's going on globally that's impacting buyer confidence? Is something else going on? Is it just a data error? What is going on here? And so I think that we're interested to see, are we going to have a revival this spring? I think the last couple of years, we've hoped for good springs and they've kind of fell a little bit flat. So I'm just kind of looking at, can we get borrowing costs or can we get home prices to a point where we see some demand spring up, as it were, or are we going to see a kind of another lackluster spring this year?
What do you foresee happening this spring with all that pent-up demand?
I mean, I live in Austin, Texas, and I see a lot of activity. I see a lot of homes coming on the market. I've talked to a lot of people who are looking to buy homes, so I do see a little bit of energy, but this is also a market that is very well supplied, has already seen a bit of a price correction. And so maybe in markets like that, we will see a little bit more energy as people feel like, okay, sellers are going to be more flexible, prices are a little bit more affordable, mortgage rates are lower than they were a year ago. So it'll be interesting to see in some of these markets that did the boom, did the correction, and now we're kind of leveling out. If we see that those markets start to perform well as, of course, we expect that in demand markets like the Northeast will continue to perform well because there's just so much demand and just not that much supply, which means that there's still going to be a lot of homes selling quickly.
Well, Hannah Jones, thank you so much for talking with me today and lending us your thoughts. I learned a lot, and I hope everyone else did too. So I hope to have you on again sometime, and this has been fantastic.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was great.